Thank you. Minister, just this morning, the CFIB testified that their members, and their members would be, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of workers and businesses, are calling upon the government to have a time frame and lay out a plan for a balanced budget. Now, I've asked you this question literally dozens of times at this committee and at Committee of the Whole. I asked you last week at Committee of the Whole. You refused to answer this question. So I really hope that today might finally be the day that you can tell Canadians, because they're demanding this. In what year will your government balance the budget?
Well, let me talk a bit first about the CFIB. I saw them, and I want to thank them for they do important work, and we work very well with Dan Kelly and his team. I've answered, like you said, that question. Canada has the strongest fiscal position of the G7, and I think what Canadian will be pleased to hear is that yesterday, again, the OECD has said that we'd have the second fastest growth in the G7, and I can quote you the numbers if you want. That might be helpful.
No, if you're not going to answer the question, again, not answer the question, then we'll move on to another question, since you still refuse, despite being the Minister of Finance, who ought to have some kind of plan. This was a promise. You know, you ran in 2015. You promised a balanced budget following generational investment in infrastructure. The investment didn't happen. The infrastructure didn't get built. 10 years later, you promised the same thing. You don't deliver. You didn't balance the budget, and you refuse to even answer or even respond to any questions about a balanced budget. So let me ask you and bring to your attention this morning's PBO report. The PBO said, and we just got this was tabled just before you arrived here. I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing, but I got to page 13 where it says, we estimate that the likelihood that the deficit to GDP ratio will decline in every year over 2026 to 27 to 2030, 31 is less than 1%. So, Minister, you have cut loose every fiscal anchor that your government has ever subscribed to, given itself, and now the PBO says you have a 1% chance of meeting your new fiscal anchor. What credibility do you think you have on any fiscal matter?
Madam Chair, this is a serious moment. I think Canadians understand that, and that's why you need to focus on facts and figures. And that's why, like I said, Madam Chair, as I was trying to explain, and Canadians who are watching understand the dynamic in this committee this morning. But what they want to know is that the Canadian economy is resilient, that what we have seen is an increase in business investment in machinery and equipment, an increase of business investment in intellectual property, a decrease in government spending, and again, someone who doesn't need a clip, perhaps like my colleague, the International Monetary Fund. They don't need a clip. They don't need a clip. They said Canada has the strongest fiscal position of the G7. The OECD, which is also an international body, just said we will have the second fastest growth in the G7. Those are the facts. Those are the numbers, Madam Chair.
Minister, you had an opening statement to make and run your clock. I'd like you to actually answer a question. You did not answer my question about credibility around your fiscal anchor, which has been challenged quite vigorously this morning by the PBO. The PBO says there is less than a 1% chance that your deficit to GDP ratio will decline. Less than 1%. Do you agree with the PBO's assessment, yes or no?
I'm sure. I think Canadians are very smart. They understand that we're facing one of the most uncertain period since probably the Second World War, that the world is complex and volatile. But despite all that, that Canada's
you had a chance to make an opening statement. Now you're here to answer questions.
Assessed by international agency as being the second fastest in the G7.
No, you're here to answer questions. You can say whatever you want in your opening statement. Answer. Why do you refuse to answer questions put to you by parliamentarians? Parliamentarians are elected to question ministers and hold them to account. Why do you hold them in such contempt?
Madam Chair, I've answered all the questions. That's a subjective comment by the member. He may not like my answer because the Conservatives don't really like when we present facts. That's the problem. And I've seen that over a decade where they don't like facts, Madam Chair. That's what I present facts that they don't like it. But that's the answer.
Yes, I asked you if you agreed with the PBO, and you talked about something completely different. That's not an answer. It may be a response. It's words. You say words at committee, but that's not an answer.